Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with the Center Square's Washington State Capitol correspondent, Carlene Johnson, here to talk about a contentious bill that received a public hearing this week, dubbed the initiative killer by critics. Supporters say it'll provide some more process to the initiative process. It notably received bipartisan opposition yesterday. Carlene, you were in the hearing room. Tell us about this bill, what it would do, and what everyone said about it.
Yeah, Senate Bill 5973 is the latest attempt to sort of complicate, if you will, the initiative process. It was pushed to the very end of the 2-hour hearing before the Senate Tribal Relations Committee, as they often do with the controversial bills. So it didn't allow a lot of time for testimony. But you're right, bipartisan opposition to this bill. You had current Secretary of State Steve Hobbs and former Secretary of State Sam Reed, who were both there testifying in opposition to complicating the initiative process, which is written into our state constitution, right? And it's kind of the only way that people in this state can push back on laws that have been passed or policy issues they're, in objection to. So what this bill would do is require someone, say it's a Brian Haywood with Let's Go Washington, to go out and get 1,000 voter signatures to take to the Secretary of State to show, okay, this one, could potentially pass. There's enough interest in it. And that's before it gets a ballot title. And that's before anyone could go out and begin gathering the actual signatures then to get it qualified, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing it would do, Tim, second thing it would require if it becomes law is that those backing these initiatives could not pay per signature on the petitions. They could pay hourly. They could still have paid signature gatherers, but you couldn't do it by individual signature. And the argument from supporters is that it puts too much pressure. It puts too much of an undue burden on those people. And it maybe opens up the potential for fraud.
Yeah, I in regards to the 1,000 signature requirement before you can really get rolling on that. I mean, I see what they're saying there. Look, at least 1,000 people should be willing to sign on to this idea. But at the same time, I mean, Brian Haywood, he runs Let's Go Washington. Everyone knows the organization in Washington as pushing a lot of these, some would say conservative, others would say pro-safety, more tax-conscious initiatives in the last few years. I mean, these require hundreds of thousands of signatures just to get on the ballot, and they haven't had a problem doing this. So yeah, 1,000 signatures might not be a lot, but it just complicates the process. And in regards to the paying signature gatherers, yeah, if you have an initiative that's super popular, people should just want to go out and support it. But that's a tough reality in Washington State with the cost of living. Not everyone can afford to spend hours every weekend, sometimes their weekdays outside of work, outside of taking care of their children to go gather signatures. Maybe they would love to do so, but it's financially not a viable option for them. And I think that would ring true whether this be a conservative or a progressive initiative. And maybe this is in response to the Let's Go Washington initiatives in the last few years, but say a few years down the line, a progressive organization wants to push an initiative. This is going to complicate the process for them too.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter which, side you're coming from. And you had folks there from the Washington Education Association, two representatives they had there testifying in support of it. But you're right. I mean, should there be some progressive organizations that back WEA or something else putting something on the ballot? You'd think that this should be kind of one of those bipartisan things where everybody goes, why make the initiative process more complicated? And you mentioned Brian Haywood. He testified. He was on the same panel in opposition brought up with Sam Reed and Steve Hobbs. And then he testified. He was very passionate. He said, look, do you think we want invalid signatures on our petitions? He's like, that's wasting my money and all their time. Why would we ever be pushing for something like that? That's not what it's about. I found it very interesting that much of, and I think I included this in my article, Tim, much of the opposition, the voiced opposition to this, whether it's people testifying via Zoom or in the room, were using the same talking points. And they came after Brian Haywood won by name, actually, and you're not allowed to, impugn someone and bring up them by name, which the chair did call out for that person, kind of chastise that person. But they all were using the same language. It's about transparency, accountability. We shouldn't have millionaires and billionaires being able to buy initiatives. Well, the truth of that is that, yes, Brian Haywood has got some deep pockets that he has gotten into with his own money to fund these campaigns to get things on the ballot. But ultimately, then it's up to the people, right? Then the people get a vote, or the legislature. But in this case, they're punting on the two that are before them right now. So those will go to the November ballot.
Yeah. You see a proposal like this, and it has bipartisan opposition. You have Democrats and Republicans saying, look, this isn't a great idea. And then you have some supporters on the other side saying, well, look, it'll add process to this. And you have to wonder, with all the opposition, I mean, I'm looking at data right now in terms of people that just signed in pro, there was a little over 1,000 people, con over 10,000 people against this. You got to wonder, why are the legislators pushing this? If even the current Democrat Secretary of State is saying, look, this isn't a good idea. And I think if you look at campaign funding, you have Democrats controlling both sides of the legislature. And who do a lot of these Democrats receive campaign funding from? The Washington Education Association, this union that is pushing this bill.
Exactly.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens with this bill, especially considering that Steve Hobbs has come out against it. And Carlene, is there executive action scheduled later this week on this bill? Where are we going next with this?
Yes, on Friday, executive action out of that same Senate committee is on the docket. I'm going to be doing a follow-up story interviewing Senator Jeff Wilson, who's the ranking minority member on that committee. What had to be really ultimately frustrating for him, and I can't wait to hear him expand on this in our interview, but when they push these controversial bills like this to the last, I think there were 5 other bills in the 2-hour hearing that were considered, had public testimony before that. So you've got like the last 20 minutes or something like that on the most controversial bill. You've got dozens of people that were in person that wanted to testify in person. And then you had some people there in, opposition, or I'm sorry, in support of the bill. Also there, a handful of them. And then many signed up via Zoom. Well, in the past, the way these bills went and the way the chair and the vice chair decide how they're going to run the hearing, if there are, like you said, over 10,000 people that had signed up in opposition to this, there was kind of deference given to folks for public testimony to kind of equate to that, right? And it's like a 10-to-1 ratio. It doesn't work that way in these hearings anymore. And the majority is in control of how the hearings go. So it gets pushed to the very end. So there's time constraints on testimony, 90 seconds per testifier. And then they spent the last 5 minutes of the hearing going to people on Zoom who had signed in support of the bill, and spending like 45 seconds on each of them waiting for these people to show up. Well, they weren't there. And then you've got guys like Tim Eyman sitting in the front row saying, hey, wait a minute, I signed up to testify in opposition to the bill. They gavelled him down, said he was out of order, and he never got a chance to testify. So, and then Senator Jeff Wilson didn't get an opportunity to even ask questions of those. They don't allow fellow committee members to inject questions and get responses back from those appearing to testify. So it's got to be infuriating. Wherever you come down, it's not how the public hearing process used to work in the state of Washington, but it's how it works now. And I know there's been attempts to offer bills to maybe change the rules that way, but we've got, such the majority has a grand majority in the state of Washington. And so there isn't a lot of interest in sort of amending how that hearing process works.
Yeah, it's hard to see these bills earning much, if any, Republican support at all. I wonder, during the hearing, was there any amendments that Republicans or Democrats brought up as sort of like a working compromise? I mean, the Democrats have the votes to pass this regardless. So it would be in the minority's best interest to try to work to some compromise that would lessen the extent. But was there anything raised during the meeting about that?
Well, sometimes after those public hearings, you will get, amendments offered by, and then staff members for those lawmakers will kind of go back and forth. I haven't heard any inkling of that today. I'll be asking, it's a good idea of something to ask Senator Wilson about, like, hey, if this thing's going to go forward, how can we make it better? Because there were some suggestions made, by folks who testified in opposition, but said, if you're going to do this, maybe you should consider, XYZ. So that is something that, again, I will ask Senator Wilson about, but set for executive action out of that committee. Whether or not this thing gets off the floor with any support of a single Republican, as you mentioned, I really, really doubt it. It's a hotly debated topic that's not going to die anytime soon because, remember they tried this last year, a different bill, but coming back again. And at this point, because of the success of some of Let's Go Washington's initiatives, as was presented in the hearing yesterday in testimony from Haywood, this is kind of the only way for Democrats to sort of chip away at the success of some of these initiatives is to burden the process.
Well, if they don't pass this year, there's two more Let's Go Washington initiatives on the ballot this fall. So I'm sure there will still be some momentum moving into the 2027 state legislature next January to take action on this if it doesn't pass then. But Carlene, we appreciate you covering this and something we'll keep our eyes on in the coming weeks, months, and maybe possibly a year or two as you cover this. And anyone hoping to catch that coverage, you can read it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.